Shalom, and welcome back to Israel with Aline. Today we came to the region of Judea to see with our own eyes evidence of the fulfillment of one of Daniel's prophecies. Let's learn about the history and archaeology of this place and understand how all of this relates to the birth of Jesus. So, if you're ready, let's get started. We start our journey today with quite a steep climb. We're going to climb a mountain now, but it's an artificial mountain made by human hands. Look, here's where it starts. Who could have been the great king of ancient times capable of creating such a colossal work? It's a really intense climb. Look at the difference in altitude between where we are now and the houses. This mountain is artificial and we can really see how colossal it is. But this is just the beginning, because if we walk just a few meters here, where do we arrive? At a great fortress. Who, more than 2,000 years ago, was able not only to build an artificial mountain, but also to place a great fortress on top of it. Who was this king? King Herodium the Great. And now everyone, welcome to the Herodium, the craziest of all his constructions. And the most important one regarding the birth of Jesus and Daniel's prophecy. To deeply understand the biblical prophecies and their fulfillment, we first need to understand the history of Israel to grasp the context in which they were written and took place. And that's why we're going to go back together now, 2,000 years ago, to the time of Herod's birth. He was born into an extremely mixed family. His father was an Edomite, his mother a Nabatean Arab. His paternal grandfather had converted to Judaism. But above all that, he also considered himself Roman. And because of that, because of his loyalty to the Romans, in the year 40 before Christ, Herodes receives the title of Herodes, the King of the Jews. However, when he receives this title, he was in exile in Rome and the land of Israel was not in his hands. However, with the support of the Romans, he comes to the Holy Land, to the Promised Land, and conquers it. So, in the year 37 before Christ, he really takes power and begins to rule over the entire region. Herodes reigned for a little over 30 years, and during this period, he put much of his effort and his money into construction projects. Constructions that many times even seem to be an affront to God and also an affront to the people. And here we see a very clear example. In Herodium, an artificial mountain, and on top of it, a fortress with towers that rose up to the skies. Something that often even reminds us of the story of the Tower of Babel. And remember that the original tower and fortress were much taller than what we see today. These are just the remains. And besides Herodium, he built the expansion of the Temple of Jerusalem, the tomb of the patriarchs, the entire city of Caesarea Maritima with the hippodrome, theater, and palace. He also built the palaces in Jericho. We could spend hours and hours here, just talking about these great earthly constructions of King Herod. And where are we going in now? These here are the remains of a Roman bathhouse, Herod's spa. All of Herod's constructions in Caesarea, Jericho, Jerusalem. Here, all of them were full of earthly pleasures. Pools, spas, entertainment venues, places for women, if you know what I mean. So we see that this is part of the constructions and the archaeology that we find from King Herod to this day. So this here was part of that spa. This specific room we're in now was the cold room. So this was a place where they could cool off a bit. Why a cold room as well? Because there was a heated pool here. And I assure you folks, the need to have a heated pool in the middle of the desert is practically non-existent. There are very few days in the year when it's cold enough here to need a heated pool. However, that was Herodes' vanity. He wanted to have a heated pool here because that was the luxury in Rome, in the capital. However, Rome has a much colder climate than here in Israel and in the Middle East. However, he wanted to be able to tell everyone that he had a heated pool and an entire spa in the middle of the desert. Herodium is one of the most impressive archaeological parks in Israel, but it's still not very visited. So if you're planning a trip to Israel, maybe you should add this place to your itinerary as well to get to know more about the life and also the death of King Herod. But what does all of this have to do with Daniel's prophecies? After all, Daniel lived in the 6th century before Christ, centuries and centuries before the birth of Herod. When Daniel is born, it's a very troubled period in this region, because the Babylonian Empire conquers the kingdom of Judea and starts sending its population into exile. One of the first people sent into exile is actually the young Daniel, who was from a wealthy and important family. And when he arrives in Babylon, he becomes part of the royal court. In the 2nd year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, he has a very disturbing dream, and he really wants to know and understand what he dreamed. And because of that, he needs an interpreter. He calls for sorcerers and magicians, but he doesn't make their lives easy. He goes to the magicians and says, "You need to interpret my dream, but I won't tell you what the dream is. You have to tell me what I dreamed and then interpret it. And if you don't, I'll know that you tried to deceive me, that you are false. And so I will order you to be killed, torn to pieces, and I will even destroy your houses." Those magicians and sorcerers were completely terrified. They said, "There is no one on the face of the earth who can do what you are asking. You need to tell us the dream, and then we will interpret it." Nebuchadnezzar clearly rejects that answer, and enraged he orders all the magicians, sorcerers, and wise men throughout Babylon to be killed, and Daniel would be one of those wise men who would be killed. And Daniel knew very well that there was no one in this world capable of discovering what the king had dreamed. But Daniel, with faith in God, even in exile, knew that God could reveal to him what had been dreamed. And then he goes to the king and asks for some time. And then he prays to God, and God reveals to him the dream and also its interpretation. And then Daniel goes back to Nebuchadnezzar with the following prophecy. "While you were lying down, O king, your mind turned to things to come, and the one who reveals mysteries showed you what is going to happen. You looked, O king, and before you stood a great statue, an enormous and impressive statue, and its appearance was terrifying. The head of the statue was made of pure gold. Its chest and arms were of silver. The belly and hips were of bronze. The legs were of iron and the feet were partly iron and partly clay. While you were watching, a stone was cut out without human hands, struck the statue on its feet of iron and clay, and shattered them. This was the dream, and we will interpret it for the king. You, O king, are the King of kings. The God of heaven has given you dominion, power, strength, and glory. You are the head of gold. After you, another kingdom will arise inferior to yours. Next, a third kingdom will arise, a kingdom of bronze, which will rule over the whole earth. Finally, there will be a fourth strong kingdom, like iron, for iron breaks and destroys everything. And just as iron shatters everything, it will also destroy and break all the others. In Daniel chapter 2, this prophecy is recorded, which speaks of 4 kingdoms. The head of gold was the Babylonian Empire, the time when Daniel lived. The chest and arms, which were of silver, represented the next empire that was yet to come, the Persians. The belly and thighs were of bronze and represented the Greek Empire. And then finally we come to the legs and the feet. The legs made of iron and the feet of iron mixed with clay. Which empire is this? This is the Roman Empire. And the conquest of the Roman Empire here in the Holy Land, in the Promised Land, in Daniel's homeland, is precisely through the Romans and Herod the Great. And as you saw, the iron was mixed with clay. That means they will try to make political alliances through marriages, but this union will not hold, just as iron does not mix with clay. And the most important wife of King Herodes was named Mariamne, and she was from the Hasmonean house, which was until then the royal family of Israel. Look at this. He forms a political alliance by marrying a princess to try to gain legitimacy and power. He tries to marry this Jewish princess so that he will be accepted, but the people do not accept him. Even so, clay and iron do not mix. And Herodes' situation with Mariamne is so bad that in the year 29 before Christ, King Herodes the Great accuses her of adultery and conspiracy and kills her. We believe that she hadn't betrayed him and that this was part of an invention, probably from King Herodes' paranoia. And he kills Mariamne, her mother, that is his mother-in-law Alexandra, and also 2 of the sons he had with her. He is capable of killing his own sons, Aristobulus and Alexandre. In the time of those kings, the God of heaven will establish a kingdom that will never be destroyed and will never be ruled by any other people. It will destroy all those kingdoms and wipe them out, but this kingdom will last forever. Look how specific this prophecy is. It talks about 4 kingdoms, and after these 4 kingdoms, the kingdom of heaven, the kingdom of God, would come. That's exactly what we see in Israel's history. The Babylonians, the Persians, then the Greeks, and then the Romans arrive with Herod, right at the end of Herod's reign. The one who is born is Jesus. And not only that, he is born very close to where we are now. Come with me, I'll show you. The houses in the background are already Bethlehem. Bethlehem, the city where Jesus was born. And it's also not a coincidence that Jesus was born in Bethlehem. Although his family lived in Nazareth, far from here in Galilee, Bethlehem is the city of origin of King David. And that's why the kings of Israel, especially the kings of Judah, came from this city. And more than that, when Jesus is born, the wise men go to Herod, who had received the title of the King of the Jews from the Romans. And they go to him because they heard that the new King of the Jews was born. And Herod then, when he hears that someone else had been born and was receiving this title, and it wasn't him or his children, Herod becomes enraged. And the Bible tells us how Herod tried to kill Jesus, the King of the Jews who had been born. And so he orders all the children in Bethlehem up to 2 years old and in its surroundings to be killed. Daniel's prophecy says that these 4 kingdoms will fall, and that's exactly what we see to this day. Where are the Romans? Where is Herod and his descendants? They disappeared. And Herodium, this great construction, this great fortress that was King Herod's pride, it rose up and seemed to reach the heavens. Today it is in ruins. We can simply see here the stones that tell this story. However, the glory left this place a long time ago. And regarding King Herodes, the king himself, what happened to him? His last days were extremely painful. The book by the historian Flavius Josephus, who lived in the 1st century, describes his painful and agonizing death, with a list of symptoms that I can't even describe all of them here. But it says that worms were eating Herod's body while he was still alive. It was a terrible death. However, after he dies in Jericho, his body is covered with all the royal jewels. Gold chains, rings, and even the crown are placed on him, and the body is brought right here to Herodium. And he is placed in a colossal mausoleum. Where is this mausoleum located? Right here. Exactly here stood a colossal mausoleum built by King Herod the Great, his final resting place. And inside here was his sarcophagus. However, not many years after his death, the mausoleum was completely destroyed and the sarcophagus was thrown down the mountain. And rolling it shattered and his bones were lost. The remains of this sarcophagus are on display today inside the Israel Museum. However, the bones, Herodes himself completely disappeared. And that's why I find this contrast very impressive. Everything that Herodes built with the goal of making himself eternal, of reaching the heavens, and he himself didn't even leave a tiny piece behind to tell the story. And in contrast to the wreckage, the few remains of this mausoleum where there was practically not a stone left upon another. Here in front of us, we see 2 cities. We see Bethlehem, the city where Jesus was born, and right next to it, we also see the city of Jerusalem, the city where Jesus made his triumphant entry, and he was received as a king. Hosanna, Hosanna, hail the King. It was also where he was crucified, buried, and rose again. And these places are visited by millions of people every year to learn about this reign, the kingdom of heaven. So here we can see how Daniel's prophecy was fulfilled. As it was written in Daniel 2:21, he changes times and seasons. He deposes kings and raises up others. God chooses kings and puts them in power, and in the same way, he can dethrone them. We saw how different empires passed through this land, but only the kingdom of heaven will be eternal. I hope you enjoyed today's video and understood a little more about how Daniel wrote 2,600 years ago about events that we can see here in archaeology even to this day. Don't forget to leave a like, and I'll see you next week.